The bus screeched to a halt at the entrance to Belorechye, and Eliza's heart squeezed painfully. 15 years. A lifetime had passed since she'd left that sleepy little town, and here she was again, on the threshold of the past. Her gaze glided over the familiar scenery, the shabby wooden houses, the river that lazily carried its waters. There was a heavy weight in this quiet peace, as if the air itself was soaked with unspoken words and old resentments. She felt a mixture of excitement, nostalgia, and anxiety, as if she had returned to the scene of a crime she had never forgotten. The house where she had grown up stood a little farther down the road. It looked dilapidated, with drooping shutters and an overgrown garden. It had once been full of life and laughter, but now it seemed a silent witness to bygone days. Eliza stepped closer, and the gravel crunched beneath her feet. Her insides clenched as memories came flooding back with renewed vigor. The smell of old wood, the creaking floorboards, the sunlight streaming through the dusty glass. It all seemed frozen in time, waiting for her return. Suddenly, the wicket gate of the neighbor's yard creaked, and an elderly woman appeared on the threshold. It was Aunt Masha, the neighbor who remembered Eliza as a child. Her gaze was wary, as if she had seen a ghost. "Eliza, is that you?" she asked, and you could hear the surprise and some understatement in her voice. Eliza nodded, feeling a chill run down her spine. She realized that her return would not go unnoticed, that the past would not let her go so easily. The questions she'd been hiding in the back of her mind for so long began to rise to the surface, demanding answers. Why had she left? What made her come back? And why, in the eyes of old acquaintances, she saw not the joy of meeting, but some strange, wary anxiety? Her past, like a dark river, was carrying its waters towards her, and she realized that she would have to dive into its depths to find answers. And that journey, she felt, would be far more dangerous than she could have imagined. And that was only a small part of the story she would have to learn. Like a shadow sliding across the old walls, Eliza returned to White River. 15 years was an eternity that had left deep wrinkles on the face of the town and in her soul. I watched her, her movements betraying a mixture of nostalgia and caution. Like a ghost from the past, she wandered through the narrow streets where every stone whispered forgotten stories. Her footsteps led her to the old cemetery where her parents rested beneath the cold slabs. She stood there for a longer time, immersed in the silence, as if trying to pick up their voices, dissolved in the wind. Meeting an old friend, Sergei, was another step in the labyrinth of the past. His gaze, full of hidden hints and unspoken words, made Elise feel that she wasn't the only one keeping secrets. He spoke of changes that had taken place in her absence, of events shrouded in darkness and understatement. His words were like shards of a mirror, reflecting only part of the truth, and that only made her more anxious. And now, in this shaky atmosphere, there he was, the mysterious stranger whose name seemed lost in her memory. His gaze, piercing and scrutinizing, aroused both suspicion and a strange excitement in Eliza. He asked questions that sounded like touching something very personal, intimate, as if he knew more about her than Eliza herself. She could feel the tension building, as if invisible threads were pulling at her, weaving themselves into a tight knot. At night, in the dusty attic of the old house, Eliza found what she was looking for. Old diaries and letters yellowed by time. Their lines, written in hurried handwriting, revealed to her another side of her family's history, dark and full of secrets. As she read, the past burst through the dam of time like a river, bringing to the surface forgotten hurts, unfulfilled dreams, and something else that made her heart beat faster. It felt like she was being watched, and that feeling only grew stronger with each page she read. And among all these discoveries, like a beacon in the darkness, loomed a story of forbidden love, which perhaps is the key to everything. And then, as if from the mists of time, the outlines of Eliza's past began to emerge. Behind the walls of an abandoned house and dusty diaries lurked not only the dark history of her family, but also the shadow of a forbidden love. It was a love that flared brightly but was doomed from the start, passionate and contradictory, full of secret meetings and stolen kisses under the cover of night. I remember how she, young and naive, told me about her feelings, her eyes shining with excitement and at the same time with some timid hope. These memories were imbued with youthful longing, the romance of secret dates in an abandoned garden, hidden from prying eyes, where the whispered confessions mingled with the rustle of leaves. But this love, as it turned out, carried not only sweetness, but also bitterness. Eliza, leafing through the yellowed pages, learned of the suffering that the affair had brought to her loved ones, of the consequences that still lingered over White River like a curse. The name of one person, a man for whom she had once had special feelings, came up on every page. I could see her heart sink at the mention of his name. And now fate brings them together again in the godforsaken town. A meeting full of unspoken words and tense silences. The spark that flared between them was not only an echo of the past, but also the promise of something new. But the past stood between them as an unbreakable wall of secrets and unspoken grievances. Flashbacks, like shards of a broken mirror, pierced her mind, revealing the tragic events surrounding this forbidden love. I saw the emotions on her face change from passion to longing and confusion. Who was the man with whom she had once shared her secrets? What did this love have to do with her family's dark secrets? Questions she longed to find answers to, but was afraid to learn the truth, for it could turn out to be the destruction of everything she held dear. Conflict was tearing her apart, past versus present, love versus duty, and this inner storm never seemed to subside. Her past haunted her like a shadow, and every day it became more and more apparent that behind those shadows lay more than just a story of a broken heart. This mystery seemed to permeate every street, every house, every stone of this city. And just when White River seemed to have opened its arms fully, Eliza was confronted with a darker side of the past she didn't even realize she had. Old diaries and letters found in the attic were just the beginning of a labyrinth leading to the heart of a family secret. Each page, each yellowed word uncovered layers of lies and secrecy, as if unearthing long-buried bones. She learned of the tragic story that had entangled her family like ivy, a story full of forbidden love, betrayal, and pain that had not subsided even years later. It wasn't just a family skeleton in a closet, it was an entire graveyard buried under a layer of propriety. It turns out that the reason for her departure 15 years ago was just the tip of the iceberg. She had learned of events that had caused her blood relatives to commit acts that made her blood run cold. Eliza felt anger and frustration intertwined with shock and confusion. The world she'd known had shattered, and now she had to put it back together again, but with the knowledge that the foundation of that world had been built on lies. She found more than just written evidence. In one of the dusty drawers, she found photographs that showed her loved ones in a different light than she was used to seeing them. Like mute witnesses, they confirmed the dark truth unfolding before her eyes. It was as if she were watching a movie that had been staged without her knowledge. And now that she had finally seen it, there was no escape. In one of the conversations she had overheard by chance, she had encountered a man who knew the truth but was desperately trying to hide it. He spoke confusedly, avoided her gaze, and seemed afraid of her every word. Eliza realized that the secret she had uncovered was not just a sad past, but a veritable Pandora's box, ready to come crashing down on the heads of many if opened. And now that the truth was so close, so tangible, Eliza realized that her choices would determine not only her own fate, but the fates of those she loved. Reveal the secret and ruin lives, or leave it at that, burying the truth even deeper. This question tormented her soul, giving her no rest day or night. She realized that her return to White River was not just a nostalgic trip, but a fateful mission in which the price of a mistake was too high. And as she tried to make sense of it all, she felt more than just family secrets looming. Eliza, like a bird caught in a snare, struggled in the grip of contradictions. She had returned to Belorechye, hoping to find peace, but all she found was a tangle of secrets tearing her soul apart. On the one hand, the love for her family, for this house where her childhood years had passed. On the other hand, the inexorable desire for justice, for the truth to finally see the light of day. She swung like a pendulum between the past and the future, between those who begged her for silence and those who longed for exposure. The tension grew every day. Every conversation was like walking through a minefield. Aunt Masha, with her insistent stare, seemed to see right through her, and Sergei, her old friend, only added fuel to the fire, suggesting that silence is not always a good thing. And in this chaos of doubts, there was only one person who seemed to understand her without words. the very stranger whose appearance in Belorechye became another mystery. He, like a beacon in the night, supported her, gave her strength to move on, even when it seemed that there was no way out. Their conversations were a revelation. They shared not only their thoughts, but also their deepest fears. It was with him that she could be herself without masks and pretenses. Eliza tried to find a compromise, a fragile thread that would tie the past to the present without devastating consequences. But the more she dug into the past, the clearer she realized that compromise was impossible here. The secret her family held was too dark, too heavy to remain buried under a layer of lies. She saw the despair in the eyes of those who clung to the past and realized that her silence was a betrayal of herself. She must make a choice that would determine not only her fate, but the fates of many others. And this choice, like the sword of Damocles, hung over her, threatening to collapse at any moment. The night before the decisive day seemed endless. Elise, tormented by doubts, wandered around the house like a ghost, trying to find an answer in the silence of the old walls. It was then, looking at the old photographs, that she realized she could no longer run from the truth. In that very instant, she made a decision that seemed to split White River into a before and an after, a decision that would require all of her courage and fortitude. She took a step into the unknown, not knowing what lay ahead. Will she be able to keep her love and still be true to herself? Can she atone for the sins of the past? Or perhaps her choices would give rise to new, even more tangled mysteries. All of this remained beyond realization, waiting for the denouement that, like a shadow, followed her every step. But even in this growing tension, there was more than just anxiety. And so the day came when Eliza made her choice. The air in White River seemed frozen in anticipation. Her decision, like a thrown stone, created waves that swept across the city, touching the fates of everyone who had ever been connected to her family. The revelations of the past she brought with her seemed to burst free from old diaries and letters, filling everything around her. First there was confusion, disbelief, and then there was pain. The pain of realizing that those they loved and respected held such darkness within them. Established relationships crumbled like houses of cards, and on their ruins new, sometimes bitter, but ultimately honest connections were born. People in Belorechye, who had long lived in the shadow of lies, began to learn to breathe in a new way. Old grudges, like old wounds, were exposed, but now there was hope for their healing. I remember one evening, sitting by the river, Eliza was talking to Sergei. Some new quiet strength shone in her eyes, which were usually full of sadness. They talked about the future, about how they would build their lives further, knowing the truth of the past. Their love, which had been tested, had grown deeper and stronger. The day came when Eliza left Belorechye, but it was no longer a flight, as it had been 15 years ago. It was a farewell to a past that had finally let her go. She was taking with her not only memories, but bitter experiences that had made her wiser and stronger. She turned around as she said goodbye, and in her gaze I read not only sadness, but hope and relief. She realized that the past would always be a part of her life, but now she was in charge of her own present and future. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I see her silhouette against the sunset, moving into the distance. And I know that despite her trials, she found her way. She realized that the past doesn't have to define the present, and that even after the darkest nights, there is always a dawn. But her story, like all stories, has its facets, and one of them is still waiting to be discovered.